All right, y'all. I wanted to put together a quick review video for y'all for AP US Government. Also, I'm going to be posting one for AP Macroeconomics and for my juniors in AP US History. This video, I'm not trying to cover every single detail. That's why I encourage you to come to individual review sessions and ask me questions individually. But I did want to cover some of the broader concepts as well as just some general approaches to each test. So I'm trying to keep this as concise as possible, but it may run a little long just because there's a lot to go over. So a couple things first. I just want to kind of put us back into a frame of reference as to what the test is all about, format, etc. First of all, you guys know a lot more than you think you know. You've been in the class all year. So I want to dispel this whole idea that a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to sit down the week of the test, the night before, and this idea of cramming, and I'm going to cover every single thing from beginning to end. You're wasting your time. You're wasting your time doing that. Instead, your study and your focus needs to be very focused. And so how do you do that? And I've been talking about this in class nonstop. You got to take tests. You got to take quizzes. You got to write FRQs that I've had y'all been doing. By doing that, you identify which areas you are stronger and weaker at, okay? You're not weak at everything. Right? There are certain areas and things you know. If I give you a list of terms, if you're to look at vocabulary from a particular unit, I guarantee you can probably check off the majority of terms on that list. I know that, I know that, I know that. Instead, focus on that quarter or whatever that percentage is that you don't know and start knocking that list down. I did with one of my classes and the other class I won't have as much time, but we actually took the actual, excuse me, practice exam, and I said, go through the ones you got wrong and label the exact topics that involves. If you notice all of a sudden, oh, I missed 10 questions that all have to do with Congress and the process of Congress, okay, that's probably a section that you need to go back over and look at. Okay, so once again, do not try and do just go over everything. Be very focused and precise on your studying and where you're going. Secondly, cut it off at a certain point. All right, before these exams. All right, it's like any major test, whether it be AP or any major end of the year type test. Look, you're gonna hurt yourself if you keep going. You need a good night's rest, and you need to have more confidence in yourself. All right, trust me. You may not think, oh, I can't recall everything right now, but on that test, your brain's working. It's working harder than you think, and it's not gonna let you down. So, deep breath, go in there. You know more than you think you know. Have confidence, and like I said, don't let. You may not come out of the test feeling like, and I've been there. I don't think I did my best. I don't think that's good enough. Then you'll surprise yourself. So don't beat yourself up either way. Don't be overconfident. Don't be, just keep a even keel, level-headed approach. Okay, remember, so specifically AP US Government, we have a 50-50 test, which I like a lot because it gives you equal opportunity across the board. First section, as we practice, you have 60 multiple choice questions that have to be entered, entering your answers in 45 minutes. Some of you have seen that time, it seems very quick, and you get caught on time. Some of you, that's not long at all, and you finish and you're sitting there with extra time. Okay, it's all about pacing. All right, you don't want to get caught too early, too late. You really want to give yourself, take an honest, just nice and steady approach. Read the question, and as I said before, read all the answers. I don't care if you get to letter B and that's the right answer. Okay, at least skim through and read the other answers before you move on. A lot of you, I think, are stopping at the right answer, circling and moving on. No, give yourself closure. You got the time. Go through it. Because a lot of you found yourself sitting there with about 10 or 15 minutes remaining. That 10 or 15 minutes is that extra little bit of reading just to be sure and confident. If you can't get something, you read through it and you can't get it, that first answer, or it doesn't just come to you like that, 30, 40, 45 seconds, just move on, okay? Come back to it. Remember, this is about racking up points. I mean, a lot of you approach these tests, you think of, oh, I'm starting at a 100 and I'm losing points as I get stuff wrong. Remember, no. Approach it like you would a game and scoring, okay? You're starting at 0 and you're going to build yourself up, okay? Where that winning score is obviously depends on how all your classmates do and all the other seniors in the country that do this test. So don't concern yourself with that. Give yourself the highest possible score and see if you can make that cut mark. So don't, like I said, this concept of a 70 equals passing, you got to get that out of your head. You got to rack up as many points as you can, and you'll see what happens. Second part of the test, remember we have our 4 FRQs. You have 100 minutes to do it, so 25 minutes roughly in FRQ. Now, I will say this, as I talk about in a second, Not all FRQs are equal. Some will not take 25 minutes to do. Some will only take 10 minutes. Some will take up 30, 35 minutes, okay? That's the point. You need to also pace yourself on this, all right? I recommend to all of you to scan through all 4 FRQs in advance, label what the topics are, and start with your strongest topic and go from there. Also, keep track of time. Once you've hit about 20 or 25 minutes on FRQ, unless you can finish it up pretty quickly and you're in the final stages, move on, okay? And if it's one of those harder ones, you'll come back to it, because what you'll find yourself doing is you move on and you stay disciplined. And the next one, let's say, is one of our the one FRQ that involves imagery. So it's a graph, it's data. It's only A, B, and C. It's very short, to the point. You get it done, you knock it out. Fantastic. It only took you 10, 15 minutes. Take your extra 10 minutes, go right back, okay? Pace yourself, pace yourself. Remember my golden rule: define, explain, explain, define. You got to do both. I don't care if it tells you in the question to do it or not, do it to be safe. You want to make 2 things clear to the reader. Number 1, and most importantly, that you're answering the question directly. But also number 2, and this is not necessarily go hand in hand, that's why you always got to make sure you do both, to make sure you know, make sure they know that you know what you're talking about. And that's where the defining part comes in. If there's an opportunity to expand and define a term that's used in the question, or to make it crystal clear what this is, do it. And then go on to explain and directly answer the question. You want to demonstrate that, hey, I know what I'm talking about here, and you never know how, even if you may not be exactly off on you may be a little off on your answer, by being very precise in the definitions, explaining, you might end up squeaking a few points out. You never know. It depends how the reader looks at it. It depends on the question itself. It can vary. Yes, some questions are very straightforward. All right? If it's something that says define blah, 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 okay, just define it, all right, and move on. Then again, it doesn't hurt you if you can very quickly put it into a sentence, or say, for example, this or that, to put it into perspective. It always helps. It always helps. It solidifies. Not only does it make the reader clear to know that you know what you're talking about, but it also builds your confidence on the test, so you know that you know what you're talking about. Okay. All right. Let's go through a couple things, just so you're aware. For those of you for AP Government students, I am on through our class site on the Hub. I am on the AP exam review folder, and I'm going to go over the resources there. I'm also going to be referencing the website that's on there because it's a very good review website to go over. Now, I'm not going to necessarily go through just unit by unit how we did things in the year. I'm going to look at the broader categories, because the broader categories for College Board and AP combine a lot of some of the units we did. For example, the first major area is constitutional underpinnings, right? We did that in 2 units. We did that as the Constitution unit, but also we did federalism. That's in there. Next, we have political beliefs and behaviors. That was all that stuff on political ideology. How do we become what we become politically, what we believe? Political parties, interest groups, mass media. That is our friends, the linkage institutions. That is a big category, I've told you, over recent years has become not only more important in our political environment, but it's also been a point of emphasis on the AP US government exam. Next, we have the big one, and that's our institutions of national government, our 3 branches. Next, we have public policy, which is wrapped into everything. Public policy is the lawmaking process and how we go from wanting something and actually getting it done and putting it into practice. So that's kind of, we've kind of weaved that into everything we've done. And then finally, and still very important, civil rights and civil liberties. So let's take a look at a couple things just to give you an idea of what I've put on the site for you. Remember, in terms of just terms and going through and kind of checking off the list and how comfortable you are, it's all about drilling, and that's where I like the flashcards. And I have put some great, what I think are very good flashcard sets from Quizlet on the Hub. You'll see them labeled as AP Government Flashcards number 1 and 2. I've also put a general review PowerPoint that is under 100 slides. I think it's like 92, 93 slides. But the point is, I wanted to get things that were relatively concise. I know 100 slides isn't short, but it's a lot shorter than going through every single presentation and notes we've done the entire time. And it's at least something that is easier to, it's more manageable to work through and skim through. And obviously the flashcards you can pick up and go. You don't have to do the entire set. You can do 20. You have a moment, something like that. For more extensive review and longer sessions, I've included 3 full-length exams, practice version exams, for us to get acquainted with it, that include both the full test, multiple choice, and FRQs, and also the answer keys and rubrics to each. Now, what I've been encouraging people to do, and in third period, I'm telling for the sixth period to do, is the multiple choice section on 2013. I think it's one of the harder of the three tests. It's the last AP government exam I put on there. And so I told people to practice that, and we actually did that in third period. Time yourself, 45 minutes. Take the 60 question test, and then check yourself. Go back to the wrong answers, label on your answer sheet what the subject is, and there you have a good base reading of where you should go. I give you the harder one on purpose because if you can do that, you can be able to do the other ones. 2012, 2005 are a little bit easier, but I mean they're AP tests. So I would kind of, if you want to go take what you got wrong on the 2013 on that test, go through and do very specific review. Go back to that unit, go back to that topic, and then try it again. Try the next test and see if your score improves or not. Regardless if it improves or not, do the same process. Look at what you got wrong, label it, and go. The answer keys are in there on all three of the AP Practice Government exams, so you may check yourself once you get done with the test. Okay. It also allows you, when you come to my review sessions, if you come on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday before the exam, to come in with actual questions. You're not going to come in 2 hours, and I'm not going to just teach the whole course to you. Or it's not even beneficial if you go, oh, can you teach me everything I need to know about the president? Okay. And go on and on. Come in with some, the president specifically, blah, blah, and blah. Give us something specific we can work off of and we can get into. And that may lead to more questions, yes, but it gives us specific starting points that we can, travel from 2 and 2. All right. So I just want to, the last thing that I want to do in the second half of this video now is I just want to go through those 6 areas that are going to be tested and hit what I feel are some of the most important areas. So starting with constitutional underpinnings, and I'm going to keep referencing kind of back and forth. I'm looking at the review site itself, which, remember, on the review site, there's the general overview is the first section, and then the second section has the same units or topics, but then has vocab lists. Those are very good vocab lists that if you don't like the Quizlet flashcards, go through those vocab lists because it has term and definition. Stuff just cross off. Focus on things you don't know. So, big things, constitutional underpinning, excuse me. This is where to bring in basic forms of government, because stuff that you should know. We've gone over nonstop. This goes back, brings in a lot of other history classes. So the basics of democracy, going from the monarchy system we have, looking at John Locke and some of the other philosophers who are heavily influential of the founding fathers. Okay, and understanding their ideas behind government, stuff like the social contract and this idea of consent of the government, popular sovereignty, things like that. The big phase to compare and contrast is to understand our first form of government, the Articles of Confederation, understanding that, yes, that is technically our first form of independent government. It's a government that values states. It's but it makes the central government very weak, and that's a direct result. You got to make the connections here. That's a direct result of the founding fathers' experience in the Revolution, coming from a very tyrannical system, or a system that was very centralized in the king and the monarchy, and wanting to move away into a more decentralized system where the individual states and local governments have power. That had problems. When you don't have a national government, it's very hard to function on a national level, to be unified. We talked about the inability for them to tax, to really have an effective military, to even have diplomacy, where you have different states making different deals with different countries. That and many other reasons, including Shays' Rebellion, some other ideas, brings forth the Constitutional Convention. And that's the heart of the constitutional unit. We have our classic battle between Federalists and Anti-Federalists, those who support the Constitution, those that do not. We battle each other on every single aspect of the Constitution, and finally we battle on its ultimate ratification. You see the battles begin with first the idea of representation. Small states and big states are concerned about who's going to have the balance of power, so we create that bicameral legislature. We have that Virginia versus New Jersey plan. The Connecticut Compromise creates our 2-house structure, our House and our Senate, making both sides happy, and having a law to be able to has to be passed through both of those. We also have all these weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation being addressed. For example, we now give power to the national government, the power to tax, the power to coin money, regulate commerce. But at the same time, we don't want to put too much power. So what's the compromise? Separation of powers, right? We have our three branches, checks and balances, etc. Also, the representation. We see our first time in a U.S. history, or not our first time, but one of the most prominent times we now have slaves being addressed in the national conversation. Southern states want to count their slaves, of course, more people, more power. Northern states don't like that because they don't treat them as people. They're classified as property. So then we have our 3/5 compromise. Once again, one of the most bizarre compromises, but it then again is a compromise that helps us move forward. And it delays the issue of slavery, kicks it down the road, so to speak, and ultimately why we have a civil war. And we instead decide to count slaves as 3/5 a person towards that. All right, so we then have, once we create this plan, we have a constitution that gives the national government a lot more power, gives the Congress a lot more power, creates a national executive, changes a lot of things that the Articles of Confederation didn't allow for in the national government. We now get this passed and ratified, and that's where we have the battle that takes place through the Federalist Papers that are being printed in support, and then you have the Anti-Federalists putting their papers out against the ratification. And you have the battle state by state to get ratification. Remember, you have Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, John Jay writing on the prominent Federalist side and making a lot of important arguments that ultimately help get the Constitution ratified and passed through the states. Just kind of some general characteristics. Federalists, remember, favor the Constitution. Madison, Hamilton, and Jay are their leaders. They saw the Articles as weak. Okay, they saw the checks and balances are good enough and should make you feel good about the government can't be ruled by a tyrant. They said it protected property rights, and that the Constitution saw its limitations, and that with them including the Bill of Rights, which is ultimately what gets the Constitution passed, that the Anti-Federalists should now be happy and satisfied. Because that important 10th Amendment that I always talk about with the Supreme Courts, the 10th Amendment is that amendment that the states always hang on to, because it says all powers not delegated to the national government in the Constitution are reserved to the states, which is why today, for example, states run their education systems and so on, because it's not mentioned in the Constitution. And this has been the battle when we introduced later on the 14th Amendment that the national government really hangs on to. Through due process, equal protection, it's their responsibility to protect the rights of all citizens, to enforce the law of the land, etc. That this creates the clash that we have today, and well, we've had it forever, but up to this day, between states and national government. States hanging on to the 10th, national government hanging on to the 14th, and the Supreme Court being stuck in the middle, trying to debate between the two. Occasionally ruling in favor of the states, but historically ruling in favor of the national government and giving the national government more power. Which leads us to like I said, the second topic of that unit, which was federalism. And this idea that we have a shared system, right? We have an overlap. There are certain things that only the national government can do versus the state government can do, and then we have shared responsibilities. We've gone to more of this shared system over time, but there are still things that are unique in each realm. And we've talked about historically the trend and pattern has been, if you look at the Supreme Court, that they've ruled being part of the national government. They've tended to rule in favor of the national government and really support that 14th Amendment. I told you the most recent example in years was the ruling on marriage, on same-sex marriage. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say anything about marriage. Well, therefore, it's up to the states to set qualifications and licenses for marriage. But what the court ruled back in 2015 is it came in and said that, well, the right to marriage they classified as being, this right as a citizen, a civil right. And essentially, I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that, but essentially, the 14th Amendment, since the national government must enforce due process, equal protection, and all citizens be fair and equal, therefore, the national government does have the power to come in and say, or rather, more importantly, the states do not have the power to say that people of the same sex cannot get married. And so that was the argument. It really wasn't necessarily a ruling in favor of the national government. It was actually a ruling against the states. So by default, the national government kind of wins on that note. But everything you could think of in terms of the battles over civil rights, gender equality, anything under civil rights with whether it be racial or religious or gender or disabilities, that 14th Amendment is what's given the national government authority to come in and overrule a lot of stuff that the state governments are doing. Okay, remember we have a lot of shared powers. I mean, I talked about roads and infrastructure are a big shared thing. Even education to an extent today. There's a lot of schools, especially in major cities, including here in Houston, rely on federal funding. And without that federal funding and having just state funding, they'd be coming up short on a lot of things they provide to their students. So there's a lot of cooperation there. There's cooperation when it comes to policing and just national, not national, but defense, security, order, law and order. We have federal and agencies, etc. Remember, there's a couple things there. There's also the process of devolution when we give powers back to the states. So like we did that with welfare in the 1990s, giving them the power to determine unemployment rules in their individual states. That's the national government taking that and giving it back. So there is a process to give stuff back to the states, and that's called devolution. Would be more of a favor of a conservative belief versus liberals, generally speaking, would be more in favor of the national government going forward. Political beliefs and behaviors. That was our whole section on demographics. So understanding, you want to know all the general terms and rules. Like I said, I get it. And at the end of the day, they're basically stereotypes. I get it. Not every rich white man votes conservative, but the general trends and the demographics, the census data, the poll data tells us that the majority do. And so there's exceptions to every rule, but so you got to go into this test with that political scientist type mind, that it's not, it's not, there are exceptions to all rules. You have to be comfortable with like knowing those generalizations. Minorities tend to vote liberal. Are there minorities that vote Republican? Yes. But the trends have shown that we're looking at where the majorities are going, where the larger numbers are going. Women tend to vote more liberal. Okay, so knowing those trends going forward, younger, liberal, older, more conservative, that idea. Also understand the process of political socialization. The number one factor is your immediate environment around you. Your family is the number one influence for most people. Okay, once again, exceptions to every rule. We talked about stuff like school, your experience, your wealth, your background, which goes into your upbringing, all things that influence how we socialize or how we interact with politics. What we hear about politics determines ultimately a lot of what we become politically. And so we talked about those general values that all people want, this idea of this emphasis on equality, wanting our voices heard, and protections and order. Noticing voting trends, knowing, for example, that we have a higher turnout in presidential elections versus, midterm or the local elections. But even then, it fails to compare to the rest of the world in terms of our voter participation rates. The history of how more people have voted. So going back to the 15th Amendment, the 15th Amendment with the right to vote for former slaves, and then 19th with women, and so forth. Okay, 26th, for lowering the voting age to 18 nationally. And so that's kind of the general stuff for there, and just knowing those voting trends. Along with this category, on this on the website, it also includes a lot of the campaigns and election process. So understanding the nomination, so the type of elections, we know we have talked about primaries and caucuses when it comes to nominating who's going to run for each party, not just at the presidential level, but it happens at other levels. And kind of be familiar with those processes. That's what's important to that part of the unit. All right. Next is a section that has become a lot bigger on the AP test, and I feel that my gut's telling me there's going to be at least an FRQ on this. You're going to see the multiple choice questions on it, and that is linkage institutions, interest groups, the political parties themselves, as well as the media that have played a much bigger role in your lifetime of politics in this country. So particularly knowing the role in money in all of that. So political action committees and how money talks and how money is being used. The attempts to limit money and then how they've been overridden. So McCain-Feingold, being a limitation on money, but then Citizens United in 2010. I talked about, remember how that made a corporation contributions classified as free speech. Because companies were classified as an entity, as like a person, and therefore having the rights to express their candidacy. So we talked about the pros and cons, and how we've tried to go back and forth and limit money, but how it's played an increasingly bigger role in our politics. Interest groups, at the end of the day, are still very effective regardless of money. Their ability to lobby, to create grassroots movements, to mobilize, to action, get their actual voters to get their members to actually vote and participate the way they want them to. You can't always do that. The larger the group, remember you have that free rider type problem where people are joining the group for benefits but not necessarily doing what the group says. The different theories of interest groups. So hyperpluralist. Remember the H for hyperpluralist means to hurt. They feel like there's too many of them, that it's it's hurting the political system. Pluralist, thinking that it's great because it divides power and gives more opportunities to get involved. And the elite theory that says, they're good, but only good if you're rich and elite and can influence it like that. So just knowing those, knowing some of the common interest groups, like the National Rifle Association, as a major group, stuff like, I'm thinking like Mothers Against Drug Driving, the NAACP, AARP, the ACLU, et cetera, different groups that are going to be against enforce certain things and influence. How those interest groups interact, not just with the law side with lobbying, but how they interact with the courts through amicus curiae briefs and trying to influence the decision of the courts, and knowing the interaction there. And then with interest groups, the idea of the iron triangle, which a lot of people have had with, where you have interest groups not just directly trying to influence Congress, but also trying to influence the government agencies who are actually carrying out the laws that Congress makes. So it's kind of like my preference would be, if I can get Congress, if I'm an interest group and I can get Congress to pass a law that I want, of course, that's what I'm going to go to first. But let's say I have a hard time with that. The other way I can put pressure on them to pass the law I want is I go over to now that government agency that implements it. Let's say I'm a big business oil company and I want to lighten the restrictions so I can do more drilling, let's say in Alaska. Okay, I'm going to go to the EPA or other organizations around that involved in the environment and get them on my side and try and convince them that, hey, this is in your best interest, the country's best interest for us to allow us to drill there, et cetera. And in turn have them be a voice as well, talking back to their bosses, aka Congress, and saying, hey, we should do this, we should do that. Remember, they are the player in this game is the kind of the player that can pick a side is that agency, that government agency, the bureaucracy. It's a powerful independent force because it falls under the executive, not the legislative branch of government. And so although the legislature sets the rules and tells them to do it, it's the responsibility of the executive and through those government agencies to execute the law. So remember, that's where this whole division of power plays a big role. And as an interest group over here, being kind of like another, out here trying to influence, I can try and act on either branch. Okay, so that's where the iron triangle. One of the big examples that was used historically, and you'll see in the textbook, is this idea of the military-industrial complex, where you have the military who actually executes military and national defense policy, Congress who makes it, and the weapons manufacturers and companies and other people who have contracts, vehicle contracts with the military. Okay, and how they have an interest to make money and profit, business, keep their people jobs. They have an interest to make laws and create policy for national defense, and they are worried about executing their orders and providing national defense. They all have their interests, but they're all interconnected, and that's an iron triangle. Knowing these general party systems, how we have a two-party system and the history of that, knowing our historical two parties. We've gone through certain eras where we have two dominant parties, one representing the more liberal and conservative side, and understanding that and seeing why each one of those eras came to an end and parties changed and became two other dominant parties. Understanding how that makes it very hard. Our voting system, like the Electoral College, for example, and our winner-take-all system, makes it very hard for third parties to get involved. Yet third parties play an important role for bringing attention to issues. Okay. And then lastly, the media. Obviously, the media has a huge impact, especially today, not just in your traditional outlets in terms of, obviously, internet sites and the news media and television and radio, but social media. We as being participants of the media have a lot of things, but understand how the media is used by both sides, by people in office, out of office, by us, and the role that influences our politics. Okay. The biggest section of the test, and you can see the most on, I can go on all day about, but I'm not going to go in as much because I think y'all got it and you need to ask questions, but your three branches of government. Okay, Congress being number one, President number two, and the Supreme Court Judiciary being number three. Not just how much each one of them know, knowing each one and what they can do and can't do, but also being able to understand how they work with each other. okay, and the interaction between the two. Especially on FRQs, they're going to ask you a lot of questions. They may start with an initial branch like Congress, but then throughout may say, how does Congress interact with the Supreme Court when it comes to this or that? So understand all the checks and balances, the different ways they interact with each other, as well as the aspects of each one. So understanding the structure of each one, how each house, the House and the Senate is set up, how they compare and contrast, the unique features of each, the committee system, and how the whole process of a law being made. And then that carries you over to the presidential side, and then how the law is executed and carried out. Understanding how the White House is set up, how a president sets up his staff, those government agencies, the cabinet structure. And then in turn, finally, you have your third branch, the courts, that uphold the Constitution and are determining whether something is constitutional or not, and keep the other two in check in the process of how, for example, Supreme Court justices are nominated and the role they play, and the whole process there, and the court system in general. I also mentioned, obviously, the bureaucracy, the government agencies. Yes, they're part of the executive, but they can sometimes, go off on their own and do their own things and get in line. And so the idea of congressional oversight and how the Congress can call them to task and say, tell us what you're doing. We can cut your budget if we don't like what you're doing, etc. Last big, and by the way, that's going to probably be about a third of not 40% of the multiple choice is going to have obviously be directly to the three branches of government. It shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, that's our government. Last big section is civil liberties, civil rights. So specifically civil rights, more of historically knowing the evolution and what's happened with civil rights and major, this is where some of the court cases come in particular, and knowing how we've progressed in that realm. Civil liberties all around our civil liberties as citizens based on the Bill of Rights. And so that leads us to the last big thing. And on the review side, there's a list of important court cases. Not every single one is important, but this is pretty concise. Got it down to about 4 pages. Could have gone a lot longer. In topic order, but also then in each topic in chronological order, cases that are very significant that you want to be familiar with, both for multiple choice or for the writing. So Marbury versus Madison, McCulloch versus Maryland, Gibbons versus Ogden, some pivotal ones at the very beginning of the course. Your civil liberties. Okay, if you don't remember this, if you go back to the civil liberties unit in government, we uploaded, remember each of us did a court case on civil liberties and civil rights, and some landmark cases. All those are on there. Gitlow versus New York, Gideon versus Wainwright, your right to attorney, all the religious cases, Lemon versus Kurtzman, Engel versus Vitale, Texas versus Johnson, okay, etc. And so these are good ones to go through. Gregg versus Georgia, so cruel and unusual punishment. Roe versus Wade, Brown versus Board of Education, all right, etc. All very important cases kind of flowing through there. So it's 4 pages and it's on there. It's a good thing to go through and make sure you understand. Okay, that is it for pretty much for U.S. government and politics. Like I said, I could teach the whole course. I just want to hit on some of the major themes. I hope this helped a little bit for you. But like I said, my biggest recommendation is to take tests and take quizzes. Actually, test yourself in order to get ready for the test. So take practice tests and then take that and don't just say, oh, I know everything, or oh, I know nothing. No, take whatever amount you got wrong, take a deep breath, label it what those topics are, and go back and methodically very focused on those topics, okay? Do not try and start from beginning of book to end of book. Precise, okay? Precision on where you interject, where you go and get that stuff, okay? Once again, as a reminder, there'll be review sessions every single day leading up to the test. The test is Thursday morning this year in 2017 at 8 a.m. Be on time, be in your testing room, have been rested, and I wish you the best of luck. And once again, if you have questions, either see me in class, come to review session, post a comment on this video, get at me a number of ways. Email me at estelez1@houstonisd.org. Whatever helps, I'm going to answer them all the way up until that morning. Okay? So I hope this helps, and let me know if I can help you any other way. Appreciate it.